Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship fitting guide for EVE Echoes. Today we're taking a break from all the assault frigates that I've been covering and instead looking at an assault destroyer. And yes, of course, it's an Amarr ship. We are of course looking at the Dragoon Assault Destroyer, and wow, what a beast this one is. I absolutely adore it. Now, of course, we're going to look at what this ship is, what it does, how you can fit it, and how you can use it, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of footage at the end of me actually using it in an anomaly too. Now, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell so that you never miss an upload, and let me know what topics you want me to cover in future videos. Remember, if it's a ship that you'd like to see covered in a ship fitting guide, it obviously does take a brief period of time for me to get that ship, to fit it, to try out those different fittings, and actually find something that's worth doing a video on and record, so please have some patience if you're asking for a ship fitting. Finally, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining us over on Patreon. Details are on screen now. Every dollar, every pledge really does help and is so gratefully received. Thank you all so much. Anyway, that's said and done, let's talk about the Dragoon Assault. Found on the Amarr Empire ship tree, the Dragoon Assault is of course up at tech level 7 on the Destroyer branch. Here it is. And I've got to say that the Destroyer Assault kind of completes the Destroyer line of ships. If you started out with the Dragoon Trainer, then this is ultimately your end goal if that was a ship that you enjoyed. And sadly, the Dragoon Sniper, I still can't quite figure out what that ship is trying to be. It's kind of the weird emo goth teenage phase that many of us went through. It's not sure who it is yet and it's trying to be cool. Then along comes the Dragoon Assault and has it all figured out, and my goodness, look at this thing. That black and platinum colour scheme is just, oh, it's so handsome, and I'm not usually a fan of the Amarr ships. Anyway, let's have a look at how this one actually works. So looking at its fitting profile, it should be fairly obvious that with 3 drone tubes, this is of course a drone vessel. 3 drone tubes that can launch small drones only. 2 high slots, 2 mid slots, 4 low slots, and then 3 power grid and 3 mechanical rigs. It's a fairly nice little profile there that has a lot of different variation that you can use for fitting. Defense-wise, 6733, most of that is stacked into armour, 2135 on the armour, 1449 on shield, and 1744 on structure. Definitely an armour tank, and a very firm armour tank at that, which actually means it's very, very obvious what you're going to be fitting this with. Looking down below here, signature radius of 56.8 is actually fairly small for a destroyer, and scan resolution of 630 means this thing does lock on at a surprising pace. Flight velocity of 235 is not too shabby either, though it is fairly heavy with an inertia modifier of 2.35 times. Ultimately, that warp status of 5.0 AUs per second as well does mean this thing can relocate fairly quickly. As far as I'm concerned, I like using frigates for the most part, and I like the speed. I feel spoiled by that speed, and when I come to anything larger than a frigate, I start to feel like, oh, it takes ages to get everywhere. But a Dragoon Assault actually isn't a bad option. It's still fairly nippy. Looking at its trait descriptions, it has the roll bonus that you would expect from a Dragoon, that plus 12.5% drone velocity. That means your drones move into combat faster, and they switch between their targets faster. It does also mean they are harder to hit. Very, very useful. And being an assault vessel, it has that 5-second increase to damage control activation time. If you fit a damage control unit, it will last for 18 seconds rather than the usual 13. Looking at the skill bonuses, Advanced Small Drone Operation gives an increase of 30% to the drone DPS, and a 5% increase to drone velocity. Now obviously at full training there, that's a 150% increase to drone DPS, and a 25% increase to the drone velocity, which already stacks with that drone velocity of 12.5 to give a 37, I've lost my math, 37.5% velocity, which is pretty sweet. Advanced Destroyer Command is actually really quite useful on this ship as well. 7.5% increase to Energy Nosferatu optimal range, and a 7.5% increase to Energy Neutralizer optimal range. Now don't get too excited, what that ultimately does is takes the optimal range of an Energy Nosferatu and Neutralizer from 4 kilometers up to a whopping 5.5 kilometers. But it does make a difference. It means that ultimately 9 kilometers is your outside rather than 8 kilometers, giving you just a little bit of extra space and wiggle room there. It's not anything overly crazy, but it's nice to have, especially if you're going for a PvP fit, although this ship does work very well with both PvE and PvP. Now, I am going to show a PvE fit, and that's the main focus of this video, but I will also have a brief look at a PvP fit toward the end. So that said and done, let's go and have a look at that PvE fit first. In my experience, both in PvE and PvP, the Dragoon Assault works best when fit as a brawler and gets up close and personal, close enough that it can actually wave at people through the viewports. Ultimately then, that's what we're going to fit around. Our top slots here, we've got Rebel, Small, Pulse Lasers. Obviously, whichever Pulse Lasers you have to hand, higher meta level they are, the better. These don't go for too much on the market right now, makes them fairly affordable for fitting a ship like this. Tech level 7 ship, the lowest you should have, of course, is Tech level 7 fittings, Mark 7 fittings. Now, looking at these, you can see the optimal range of these is 5.83, but it does have a fairly rapid accuracy fall off of 2.98, meaning so you've got, what, about 6 to 9 kilometers is your 100% down to your 50%. That means we don't really want to go much further than 9 kilometers, but at 9 kilometers as well, we're kind of hitting the edge of the Nosferatu range anyway, so orbiting at about 8 or 7 is our best place to be here. Ideally, you want to try and get to that 6 mark, simply because that keeps the optimal range perfect here for these. Obviously, the reason we've gone for pulse lasers rather than beams is because we want that high DPS. If we're going to be right up in their grill anyway, then sure as heck we're going to be using the pulse lasers rather than something that's got a lot slower tracking in regards to the beam lasers. They're going to struggle to hit anything, and they don't do as much damage anyway. Pulse lasers are the weapon of choice here. Now for PvE, an Energy Nosferatu makes an obvious choice here in the mid-slots. Being an Amarr ship, obviously our lasers use capacitor every time we fire them, so having an Energy Nosferatu equipped just helps keep that active. It also feeds into our armor tank setup, as you can see in the low slots there. It just means that this ship is going to remain capacitor stable for that little bit longer, and if we're going to be in range, we may as well be using it. Obviously, the second bonus to the Dragoon Assault of Energy Neutralizers is all very well and good, but kind of useless in PvE. Energy Neutralizers do not work on rat ships. Ultimately, that's because rats theoretically have infinite capacitor. They actually kind of have infinite and zero capacitor at the same time. They've got enough capacitor that you can always drain them, but they've got so little capacitor that you can never actually neutralize them. It's a weird mix. Anyway, the second slot, therefore, is an Interruptive Stasis Webifier, just in case anything decides to get a little bit too fast for us to deal with. Anything that is going to try and orbit us in a nice sharp velocity, sorry, not slow, a fast and sharp velocity, like, for example, something like a Slasher 2, then this allows us just to slow it down that little bit to help our lasers hit it. Of course, for drones here, go for whatever is best for you. I've put in 3 Mark 7 Acolytes. Obviously, these are still the best things on the market right now, and I've got 3 Mark 7 Warriors hiding there in the drone bay. The main reason for this is that I've got electromagnetic so that I can go up against the opponent's shields, and if I'm going up against armor tanking opponents, I can swap to the Warriors, and they will do a lot more damage against armor, thanks to them having an explosive damage profile. Now, looking into the low slots then, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, this is definitely an armor tank ship, so I have, of course, gone for a Gorget Small Armor Repairer. This just allows us to repair any incidental damage that armor tank happens to be taking, and ultimately, with the Nosferatu going, I should be able to run this indefinitely. The second slot here is a Pilfer Adaptive Armor Hardener. Now, you might be saying, hang on, Benzie, if you're going to be stacking into armor resistances, why not use the damage control unit? I mean, after all, a damage control unit, one, it activates for 5 seconds longer on this ship, being an assault vessel, and it also applies to the shield and the structure. Well, with the Dragoon, ultimately the shield is so small, and we're going to be hitting the armor fairly quickly, that didn't really bother me. The idea here is that this is a flat 19.13% across the board to my armor damage resistances. I don't care about the shields. I'm quite happy for the shields to dissipate the moment we get into combat, and I want this as a permanent bonus. A similar level damage control unit, though, will only do about 8% increase to the armor. Not really much. You then activate it for, yeah, you get that 18-second activation time at 800% boost, which means you take practically no damage for those 18 seconds, but it's then got a 2.5 minute cooldown. Those 2.5 minutes mean the damage control unit is not really doing much there. You're only getting that 8%. Yeah, you get a big boost for 18 seconds, but you get almost no boost afterwards. This gives you that straight 20%, nearly 20% boost across the board permanently. And for PvE, when you're going up against little mini fleets of rats, to me, that has always been the better option. Now, the third slot in the lows here is an Imperial Navy drone damage amplifier. Obviously, our DPS on this ship, as you can see here, is primarily done through the drones, 137.79 on the drones, only 80.65 on the lasers. You could fit a heatsink in here, but quite frankly, I think you're better going into the drone damage. Ultimately, if I were to unequip that, just to explain why I've gone for this particular one here, If I were to unequip that just to see the flat DPS figures here, you've got 80.65 on the lasers, 129.9 on the drones. If I'm going to apply a 5% boost, a 5% boost of 129 is bigger than a 5% boost of 80, and that is just ultimately, it's as simple as that. That's why we fit that, and you can see it gives us an extra 8.45 cold. We can activate it for additional damage later as well. Final low slot then is a Smuggler Small Afterburner. This allows us to relocate around the battlefield fairly quickly, and whilst we're not going to be speed tanking anytime soon, having an Afterburner running does help us just to maintain a slightly faster orbit and makes us that little bit trickier to hit. Always useful. Simply, yeah, we've got some nice solid tank, but if you can reduce the amount of hits you're taking, then your tank just, well, it's got less that it has to actually handle and deal with. Anyway, looking then into the rigs. For the power grid rigs, I've gone for drone firepower augmenters. Notice that it does say here, a ship's sentry drone damage. That is not the case. This does work on both standard drones and sentry drones. That is a typographical error. I have proven that. If I were to unequip this thing now, you would see my DPS drop. And ultimately, I've gone for 2 of those. Yes, they don't stack. Yes, there's a penalty there. Sorry, they do stack, but there is a penalty. It means you're not getting 12.5 plus 12.5 being 25%. The second one gives a reduced effect. I think it works out around 60%. So rather than 25% total, you're only getting about I think it's 18, 19, 20% overall increase. But that's still better than not having any. Now, because I didn't want to stack 3 of those and just get the damage straight off on those, because that third one is going to suffer an absolutely massive penalty, cost a lot of money and not really do much, I thought a laser collision accelerator would be a better option there. Although the one that makes your drones activate a little bit faster can also work, but I just had a laser collision accelerator lying around, and I thought, you know what, this just helps against any shield tanking ships as well, as my lasers are going to be a little bit better. Obviously, I'll have the electromagnetic acolyte drones there as well, stripping through lasers quickly, but it just helps that go that little bit faster, and considering how many caracals there are around these days, that seemed like a smart thing to do. A polycarbon engine housing is our first option then for the mechanical rigs, simply for that inertia modifier adjustment, meaning we can maintain a sharper orbit, and the same again with the auxiliary thrusters. Flight velocity adjustment increase allows us to move that little bit quicker. Now, ultimately, on this build, your third rig is very much up to you. You could stack either an auxiliary thruster or another polycarbon engine. Of those two, I would go for an auxiliary thruster, simply because you're not going to be orbiting quite close enough to have the reduction really mean much. But you could also go for something like a targeting rig that will mean you lock on even faster, definitely for PvP, that one's great fun. You could go even for something like a capacitor increase, but frankly, this thing is pretty cap stable for the most part anyway, thanks to us orbiting within Energy Nosferatu range. So it gives you that little bit of safety if someone does decide that they want to neutralize you, or if they're going to put on like 3 or 4 Nosses, but it's, I don't know. To me, I prefer the flight velocity or the scan resolution on that one. The PvP fit, if we're completely honest, is practically identical to the ratting fit. The only difference is 3 modules are swapped. In the mid-slots, the first one we swap is the Interruptive Warp Disruptor. We need something to stop our opponents getting away and running out of the combat. This currently is our only tool for doing so. I will note that when Scramblers are added, if I am correct in my expectation that Scramblers are about 7 to 10 kilometers in range, they're higher strength, and they shut off micro warp drives, then absolutely they are going to be the better option here than the Warp Disruptor, simply because we're going to be in the range to actually use them. That said, for now, a Warp Disruptor is the only thing that will do that job, and I've gone for an Interruptive here, simply because that Warp Jammer strength of 2 just helps in case they have any form of stability. Very nice for getting rid of those pesky Shanyu Destroyers, for example. The second mid-slot, we've swapped out the Nosferatu for a Neutralizer. The main purpose of this is that ultimately we want to be able to shut down their capacitor as swiftly as possible. If we can shut down their capacitor, then they're not going to be able to use any of their tanking modules. No tanking modules means that any damage you do can't be repaired, and if they're using lasers or railguns, it means they also stop firing back. If they're using an afterburner or a micro warp drive to try and keep some range and control the distances, then again, no capacitor means those modules get switched off too. A lot of people seem to underestimate how powerful a neutralizer can be in PvP combat. I'm fitting one here. These are absolutely amazing and well worth the time. Now, the only downside to this is that obviously by swapping out the Nosferatu, we are no longer capacitor stable. In fact, you can see we are less than a minute here, 0 minutes, 45 seconds if everything here is activated. Now, the aim ultimately is not to have everything activated. There's no real, hopefully there'll be no real need to actually get in to activate the armor repairer, for example. This time around, then, we have swapped the armor hardener out for a basic damage control, because we want to be able to get up into the range that we're actually going to start firing, and then immediately activate this to stop taking almost any damage at all. 7.97% across the board, shield, armor, and structured damage resistance. That gets boosted by an additional 800% for the 18 seconds that this thing's activated. The aim is that ultimately you want to kill them during those 18 seconds, or very shortly after, before our capacitor runs out. It's actually going to be slightly longer than 45 seconds, because as I said, we probably won't have that armor repairer running. You could even swap that for a second drone damage control, or even something like a heat sink to make the laser turrets do a little bit of extra damage as well. But I do like having it there in case I need to disengage. If I can disengage from the fight and I've taken a bit of damage to the armor, it allows me to repair that up, sit in the shadow of a planet somewhere, let my shields reboost, and I can go back on the hunt from there. Rigs obviously stay exactly the same, it's just those 3 modules that change for PvP and make you a real heavy burst damage ship. Obviously, that your aim is just to get in, hit them as hard and fast as possible, and if that doesn't work, get out there before you're dead. Here we're going to try out Seizing the Chance Advanced. This is a Tech 7 combat mission, and it's a 2.5 million ISK one, so I thought this might be a decent way to showcase how good the Tier 7 ships can be in PvE when given a chance. And that's quite a cool little bit of space to come into. I do like it when you get a mission that's not just, oh yeah, it's just a standard bit of space again. It actually has some kind of story or function to it. So we're going to put on our orbit 4 kilometers, and I am actually going to set that as a generic orbit here, 4 to 5 kilometers. There we go, so I can just tap that. Get in on this Gisty Talwar. There we are. Of course, we're going to be losing a lot of our shields, but with Armor Tank, what do you expect? Within the 20-kilometer distance, off go the drones. They can start doing some damage against this thing as we approach. And of course, I double-tapped it. I always do that with drones. Why do I always double-tap the drones? Anyway, let's try and move in. Obviously, this structure is getting in the way a little bit. As we're coming into range now, we're going to put the Nosferatu on, and we're going to put the lasers on. It's worth mentioning as well that actually Nosferatus can be activated from any range. They have no activation cost, so even if they're not draining, they're not actually causing any penalty either, and it just means that they automatically swap to whatever it is you're going to be attacking them with. There we are, we're taking a little bit of damage onto the armor, but we can put the resistances on now, and obviously armor repairers do cycle at the end of their upgrade, so we'll have plenty of time to get that activated there. Let's also pop the drone damage amplifier on, just to get that Talwar down a little bit faster. And then we're going to move on to that Bellicose, not the Cyclone, on to the Bellicose. Of course, the drones get stuck there, as does the Nos. I like that they put in the patch notes today that obviously they're updating the AI of the various rats. They're not updating the AI of my drones, though, are they? Anyway, let's drift into that Bellicose, see a little bit of damage being taken en route here. This structure is not helping things at all. This is a big problem in the game right now. Having these structures in the middle of missions that make it very difficult to actually navigate and do anything with properly. So we're going to manually pilot through this. Ugh. It looks awesome, but my goodness, it's annoying. Okay, there we go. There we go. We're through. We're through. Let's try kiting these guys a little bit out of here so that they can actually come and chase me. We don't have to orbit inside that absolute hellhole there. Nope. They're not really chasing, or I'm moving at way too fast a speed to the point that only my drones are doing damage. But hey, at least I'm showcasing how little damage I'm taking in response. That's a good thing, right? Benzie's not completely messing this video up due to a structure just being completely ridiculous and awkward. NetEase, please fix. Okay, can I actually go through this now? Is this something you can pilot through? Ugh, you know what? You know what? Let's just kill this blasted Bellicose and move onto that Cyclone. See if we can orbit the Cyclone. Where are you? Are you inside this structure? Yes, you are, which means I'm probably going to get stuck on this as well. Oh, look, I'm sailing through the solar panel or whatever that is. Collision is absolutely terrible. Admittedly, the same is pretty true in EVE Online. If you've ever had a mission that involves you fighting in or around asteroids, like those weird hollowed out asteroids, you'll know what it can be like. Anyway, there we are, we're now orbiting the Cyclone. Decent amount of damage there to that. And I've got to say, actually, Cyclones are ridiculously tanky, so the fact that I'm doing that much damage to one is pretty impressive. I'm quite happy with that. I am going to manually pilot away before I fly through that dish, though. We're going to just try and turn and head over this way. No, we're going to fly straight headlong into that dish, because of course we are. Oh, man. This is not fun geography to have to deal with. Who thought this was a good idea? Who picked this mission? Distant Cyclone is slowly going down, and hey, at least I get to do a bit of manual piloting here, which I'm always quite happy to get to do. A lot of you guys ask, what do you actually, what's the purpose of manual piloting? And like here, it allows me to not worry about the orbit taking me into a position, but I can still keep up my angular velocity by moving always at approximately a 90-degree angle, like here, a 90-degree angle across the ship that I'm shooting at, or rather, across the ship that is shooting me. Slight differential away from that isn't a problem, so like if you're moving at, say, 45, anything between 45 and 90 degrees is pretty good. It's just angular velocity that makes you that little bit harder to hit by turrets. Anyway, now we're moving at a proper transverse velocity there. Let's get that Cyclone down, and then we can move on with this. I'm not going to do this entire anomaly because, goodness gracious me, this monstrosity of terrain is just causing problems. And as much as fun as I'm sure it is to watch me crash repeatedly into a giant satellite space station thing, possibly some kind of comms relay, maybe? I don't know. Let me know what you think it is in the comment section below. As much fun as it probably is watching me crash into it, it's not much fun piloting through it, and I'm not going to sit here and just complain for the rest of the video about this blasted thing here. But you can see I'm out of my drone range now, out of my laser range. The drones will still do the damage. Anyway, well now, wasn't that fun? To jump into a combat encounter saying, oh wow, that scenery looks awesome, I love fighting around this kind of backdrop, only for it to then completely spoil my day and be one of the most awkward things I've ever done an encounter around. But there we are, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Now, the Dragoon Assault is not the only drone assault destroyer. If we come into the Galente ship tree and up to tech level 7, of course we have the Algos Assault as well. Now, looking at the attributes and fittings, this has a very similar profile and a very similar feel across the board. The reason I opted for the Dragoon Assault isn't actually because it's an Amarr ship or anything, but because across the board it is flat out better. It has a higher defense. Yes, okay, the Algos Assault has more in the shields, but it has considerably less in armor, and that counterbalances with a total lower defense. Things like its signature radius, its flight velocity, even things like its scan resolution are all worse than the Dragoon Assault. That said, if you're looking for a dedicated PvP platform, I would argue that the Algos Assault is a better choice, because if you fit it with that damage control unit, that benefits both the shields and the armor, and of course the shields are a little bit bigger on this one than they are on the Dragoon. Beyond that as well, looking at its bonuses here, you've got drone EHP for advanced small drone operation rather than drone velocity, which means those drones are just that little bit more survivable if they're taking any damage, 25% extra hit points, and the advanced destroyer command bonuses are different here as well, warp disruptor optimal range, and the energy neutralizer optimal range. So where you saw me do the Dragoon PvP fit earlier, putting that onto the Algos Assault, you're getting benefits to both of those modules immediately, which does make the Algos Assault slightly better for PvP, but in my opinion, not as good for PvE, and for that I would rather go for the Dragoon personally, just because I think it does better across the board. But if it's dedicated PvP you're looking for, then the Algos Assault does take it. Well, that just about covers everything that I wanted to say about drone assault destroyers. In this case, the Dragoon Assault, I am really enjoying this ship. I'm normally not a big fan of going into destroyers, with the obvious exception of the Thrasher line, but I do actually really quite enjoy using this ship. It's quite fun to use in PvP as well, being able to just sneak up on people, lock them down, neutralize them, and kill them quickly. Ultimately, it can be a great fun little playstyle, especially if you're looking to go ganking in some low-sec combat anomalies, public combat anomalies. Really, really worth giving it a try in my opinion. Fairly expensive, I think they cost about 60 million to make if you're looking at raw materials and you've got a good destroyer, so expect to pay anywhere about 70 to 80 to someone who you know. If you're buying one of these off the market, of course, expect to pay twice that, because market prices, and just that's what people do. Anyway, folks, let me know what you think. If you're using one of the Dragoon Assault destroyers, let me know in the comment section down below. Find me on Twitter, take some screenshots in-game, and then put them to Twitter with the hashtag CSKL. I will come have a look. I love seeing all your awesome screenshots and your awesome ships. Otherwise, folks, happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.